I wanted to just kind of end the evening with talking about other substances besides alcohol. Alcohol is obviously something that is a huge issue with our kids, and we do see it, and like Amanda said, it's really the number one substance of use that we see, but it's not the only one. And sometimes we're very aware of alcohol, but we may not be aware of some of the other substances that our kids are engaging in and some of the risk factors associated. So I just have up here some of the substances that we hear and see about more frequently. Prescription drugs is a big one. Marijuana and marijuana extracts. I'm going to talk specifically about marijuana and marijuana extracts because that's just something that I feel is really important with some of the mixed messages that our kids are getting with legalization. That's something I hear a lot about from students. There's a lot of questions from students. Well, if it's legal, why can't I use it? Why is it unsafe? That sort of a thing. And then over-the-counter medications. When we get the opportunity to talk to students, we always talk about legal doesn't mean safe. Okay, so just because we have certain prescription drugs or over-the-counter medications doesn't mean that they can't be abused in a harmful manner. In terms of over-the-counter medications, the one that we see abused more frequently is cough medicine. To you and I, that may sound absolutely disgusting. I don't want to take a tablespoon of cough medicine, but we see kids mixing that with Sprite or Jolly Ranchers, a large dose, an excessively large dose of cough medicine can cause drunkenness, hallucinations, that sort of a thing, and we do see it, and we see that at a younger age. Because kids can get their hands on that more readily. And so really talking to kids about the fact that there are unhealthy, unsafe ways that any drug can be abused is really important. For those of you that haven't heard of the cough medicine mixture, sometimes it's called lean, sometimes it's called purple scissorp. We can thank one of our rap singers, I can't tell you his name, but he references it in a song. Sometimes it's called dirty Sprite. Be aware of some of this language that you might hear or see amongst kids, and they might not even realize what it is, but we want you to be aware of it. So just a little bit about the drug culture. You know, the role of awareness for us as parents is huge. I'm a parent myself. I have a litter of children, 22 on down to, I have quadruplets that are almost 13. And this is something that I have found as a parent we have to engage in early. And that's scary to do as a parent because it's hard for us to think about our 11 or 12 or 13-year-olds engaging in substance use. But if we don't talk about it, that risk is there. And so the more we can stay ahead of our kids, which is hard, it is a cat and mouse game when we think of knowing and understanding all of the different things that can affect our children and influence them, especially when it comes to substance use. And it really is, whether we talk to professionals or parents, it's becoming harder and harder for us to recognize all the many different drug references that we hear in pop culture or in clothing or in just everyday language that our kids use. So the more we can stay ahead of that game, the better we are, asking questions. If our kids say something and we're like, what are you talking about? Hoping that they tell us. And if not, there's a beautiful thing called the internet, and you would be surprised what you can find on the internet. That's good for us as parents, not good for kids all the time. So pay attention to music, the movies, TV that our kids are listening to and watching. If you hear something that you think might have a reference to substance use, it's important to say, hey, you know, fine that you like this music, but are you really listening to the message? And I just want to make sure we're clear on how we feel about that message. Hidden drug references and images. I have a few items up here that I'm going to show you just for awareness, but we're seeing things in clothing logos that to the average person, we may not realize that that has a drug reference, but it does. Certain images, Marilyn Monroe is a big one that I'm hearing about now in terms of Marilyn Monroe t-shirts and that connection to a drug reference, and so the more we can be aware of what some of those are, the better chance we have at catching some of that. The internet has made accessing drugs easier. Specifically, I'll tell you, every piece of paraphernalia or items that I bought up here, I purchased online. You know, if kids have a Visa debit card or a gift card that they may get, a Visa gift card, it's very easy. Yes, it asks if you're an adult, but you just click a button and away you go. So it's very easy for kids to get their hands on these things. And drugs don't look a certain way anymore, so it's sometimes hard to know. We see things, especially with edible marijuana products. We've heard of heroin sweet tarts, meth-laced lollipops. Things are looking less like drugs and more like candy. And that's hard for our kids, too, to even understand. Briefly on marijuana, the biggest message that I want our parents to understand that we can deliver to our kids is that even where marijuana is legal, it is never legal for a student. It's never legal for anybody under the age of 21. And again, that goes back to brain development. I hear from students a number of mixed messages, but the number one thing that we can always come back with is marijuana on an adolescent brain is different than marijuana on an adult brain. That's just the way it is. It's apples and oranges. And what's really scary is that marijuana is not like it used to be. The potency has drastically changed, and so we're seeing stronger effects. We're seeing those physical addiction and that psychological addiction, things that we had never seen years ago. In fact, I used to work in adult substance use, and it was very rare for us to be able to get somebody just strictly on marijuana alone into treatment. But so if you just even look at the potency, so in the 70s we saw about 1% THC. THC is that intoxicating chemical in marijuana that makes you feel high. In the 90s, that was about 4%. Today, that's as high as 20%. And what we hear even from law enforcement is that when it's coming from Colorado, that number is even higher. And so what does that mean? Well, that means stronger effects for our kids. We have had kids end up in the ER because they are hallucinating on marijuana. These are things that we didn't used to see. And helping our kids to understand that this is a very different, marijuana is just so much different than it used to be years ago. So what are some of those effects that you can talk to your kids about? Brain. The brain is the most highly affected part of our adolescence that are affected by marijuana. So we see a reduced ability to concentrate, impaired, reduced short and long-term memory, reduced ability to comprehend, impairments in memory, perception, and judgment. All of these things can be affected by marijuana use. And we also see more serious connections with mental illness, even things like schizophrenia, anxiety, and suicide. And it's interesting because when you talk to some students about why they use, we do hear, well, I self-medicate with it. It helps my mental illness, when in reality, it probably isn't helping, but that's their perception. Just a little bit about different ways that kids are ingesting marijuana. We're not just seeing, the marijuana bud smoked or in joints. We're seeing things like edibles. Why? Because they're easy to disguise, pop brownies, different things like that. What's scary about edibles is that it is metabolized differently, and it takes longer for individuals to feel that high effect. So what happens if, kids like that immediate gratification. So what happens, they eat a little bit, I don't feel high. Pretty soon they've eaten more, and then we start to see those really high kind of hallucinating effects. Dabbing, that's marijuana extracts. So if you ever hear the word dab, it's not just Cam Newton, one of these, which is something that I see with my kids sometimes, but it really is in reference to marijuana extracts. And what I would point out with extracts is that the potency of marijuana can be as high as, of THC, as high as 60 to 80%. That is an obscene amount of THC that is getting ingested. How we're seeing this used is e-cigarettes, vaporizers. You can buy different vape pens that are used for different products such as oil and wax. And then of course it can be inhaled through a bong as well. But essentially it looks kind of like Carmex or honey or a waxy product, and it's the THC rich portion of that marijuana bud. And we do see that here, and it's important for our kids to really understand how extremely dangerous that can be. We went to actually the Independent Center hosted a marijuana 101 class this last week, and Deputy Shores, who was visiting with us, was showing us some videos of some actual footage of some students who had used marijuana extracts. And this kid, you would have thought he was having a psychotic episode, thinking he was hearing voices and heart palpitating, thinking he couldn't breathe, wanting to go to the ER, that sort of a thing. And I think that's some of what we might see in the ER as well, as kids who are thinking they're having these panic attacks, and it's really the effects of the marijuana. Just real briefly, this is just how you can be aware of some of the things that we see on the internet. These are just YouTube videos I've found: how to make pot brownies, cannabis 101, hash school, make your own dabs, how to make high-grade extracts. All of these websites are sites where you can purchase paraphernalia. So I just think it's a little disturbing that our kids can access this so easily. And then where do kids hide drugs? This is a question we get at SCIP a lot, and I don't have an easy answer for that, because wherever they can find. But backpacks, we actually see it hidden in backpacks, cars, on clothing, just a variety of different places. I will show you some here. You can purchase, I don't want to walk away and have this, you can purchase different things where we do see, they're called stash containers, but you can buy these and they're actually advertised on for banks or whatnot. And this looks like a Rockstar energy drink, but if you open it up, it's just a hollowed out container. They have all sorts of different things that you can purchase like that. Now we're all going to go home, and if our kids have any Ritz crackers, we're going to do one of these. Just be aware that these are things that are out there and available. This is the newest trend seems to be clothing. So these are brands that are not necessarily marketed to hide drugs, but they are known to be associated with heavy use, especially marijuana use. So this is a jacket. My SCIP coordinators thought it would be great if I just wore all this stash clothing, but I didn't want to scare anybody. So this is a jacket that we purchased, and afterwards you guys can come up here. It is really hard to find the compartment in here, but it's hidden right here. There's a zipper. And there's this place, it's a pretty big space that you can put things in here. But it's kind of hard to recognize and see where that is. Under here, this Velcro's off, and there's actually a pocket in here that things can fit into. And this, I think we purchased this for about, $40, which is no different than another type of hoodie. This is called Grassroots California. This one, in my opinion, they've got this bear symbol on the back. As a parent, I don't know, that might catch my eye a little bit more because it's got a little seedling as their image that kind of might be more affiliated with marijuana or whatnot. This is just a beanie hat. You see kids wear these all the time. Inside, there's a Velcro pocket, and it's actually really hard to even open. But again, little things can go in there, whether it's marijuana or pills or what have you. This is a baseball cap. This particular brand is No Bad Ideas. You can recognize that because it typically has this little crown on it. And this particular one, underneath the brim here, you can't really see it, but this opens up and there's a big pocket right in there. And so for all of us, it's getting, especially for schools, it's getting harder to really know what kids have or what they're hiding if we're suspecting that use. This one trips me up the most. These are shoes. And they kind of just look like, if you have a kid who's into skateboarding or whatnot. But down here in the tongue, and it goes all the way down through about right here is the pocket that things can be hidden in. And again, these run about $60, which are cheaper than most tennis shoes. I think I just got my son a pair that was about $100, and I thought I was getting a deal. So again, these are things that are out there and available, and if we're just aware of them, and we're aware of some of the brands, so No Bad Ideas, Supra, that's another one of the brands. No Bad Ideas, Grassroots, those seem to be some of the more prevalent lines that have some of those stash compartments. And they don't always call them stash compartments, they'll just call them like hidden pockets or whatnot. I don't know why you need a hidden pocket. Those things are out there. The other things I have up here are just different. This is a flashlight that's actually a marijuana pipe. So it opens up and the marijuana goes here, and then this, you actually smoke it through here and light it. These are all just different gadgets that they have out and available. So you're welcome to take a peek at those. So this is why I have Sandy here to talk about, so what do we do with all of that information? Besides, we don't want to be scared, right? We want to use prevention, and we really want to help our kids to avoid some of this. And I talk a lot about risk and protective factors, because protective factors are a huge force for us in terms of prevention, in terms of really recognizing what are those protective factors that we know are proven to reduce underage use, whether it's drugs or alcohol. Parental involvement, that's a huge one. Positive peer groups, involvement in after-school activities. These are all known to help reduce that use. I don't know if you want to speak on that a little bit.
Yes. I'm Sandy Morrissey, Prevention Director at Region 5 Systems. And actually, there's research to support. If there's increased risk factors, really take a look at what are those protective factors surrounding the youth and within the family. If those protective factors are lessened, what are their support systems? Do they have family, friends? Is everybody working or educated? Are there concerns financially? Do they have spiritual beliefs, whether they go to church or not? Do they have values within their family that they uphold? Rules, boundaries? Do they address problems and seek support when they need it? Any of those protective factors, excuse me, educating themselves when there is a problem and finding solutions, being a role model as a parent. Actually, with resiliency, they've identified there's just one thing that needs to take place. The most powerful thing for a youth to grow and thrive is to have one caring adult that they know loves them regardless and will help them. So there's a lot to be said with risk and protective factors. The schools have done a great job in terms of incorporating those. Our youth serving organizations do. We continue to build on various methods and strategies that can be used, and risk and protective factors are always kind of the core, the root of all of it. So.
And really at that individual level too, helping to give our kids the ability to solve problems, to engage in conflict resolution, to build self-esteem, to feel good about themselves and who they are as an individual, which we know that's hard for kids. I remember what it was like to be a teenager, and we don't always like ourselves. We don't always have self-esteem or feel good about ourselves, but it's really important that we continue to work on that and develop some of those individual strengths. And at a family level, just even how family management, that can be a huge protective factor in terms of, Amanda talked earlier about that family policy piece. And so often when we hear the word policy, we think at the government level, but we're really talking about what are our expectations for our kids, what boundaries do we want to set, what do we want them to know that if they get in a situation that may be unsafe or scary for them, or that they feel uncomfortable with, what is our plan as a family? How are we going to handle that? And then what are the consequences? Are there consequences? You know, if you come home stumbling drunk, yeah, there'll be consequences. And we may not be able to address it right here now, but the next day we will sit down as a family and we will talk about it, that sort of a thing.
With prevention efforts, what we know is enforcement of policy is really what makes change. So I think Amanda did a great job before talking in regards to law enforcement, whether it's compliance checks or checkpoints. We know those make a difference. Enforcement in the home is going to be huge. We're really hoping this coming year. The schools have done an excellent job in terms of really incorporating some evidence-based programming into the school. We have early intervention programming for kids that they see are at risk. We do these parenting and community meetings to really try to train. Part of what happens if we don't have community investment and the kids don't see the adults involved, they're going to think it's not as significant as we do. So it's important we begin to really build capacity. We get more adults engaged so that the kids know policy is going to take place. And some of it, I think there's parents that really care and want to be a good parent and just don't know how. And some of that is generational. Some of it's trauma that they've experienced, previous generations have experienced, and oftentimes they end up just in survival mode rather than thinking, what can I do to be proactive? What can we do as a family to get out of this? Kids want the security. Kids that end up using really to cope, to deal with grief, They want the pain to go away. They don't want to really complete suicide. They don't really want to live a lifestyle that's so chaotic that they're fear-ridden, nor do the adults. So some of that pattern that we have to break is really getting the majority, which is about 80% of community that really lives pretty healthy lifestyles. Even if they've experienced some trauma, they've faced adversity, they can bounce back from it. But it really has increased in terms of that 10 to 20% where there's enough dysfunction that people are thinking it's greater than it is. But we really have to take the time and pull together. So some of our prevention efforts, I've mentioned some within the schools, but really we have a talkaboutalcohol.org website, and we're really wanting community to invest in that. We're videoing various trainings so that if people can't make it to a training, they can sit at whenever they do have time and view some videos. We'll have a community page for Lancaster and the surrounding 15 rural counties, and we hope that that grows throughout Nebraska. There'll be a place to talk about community successes, some of community challenges, community calendar, what's on board in terms of prevention events. And so we're pretty excited about that. But we also have an opportunity to, whatever strategies we see necessary. Alcohol is still number one. Marijuana, obviously, we see climbing. And my concern is obviously the increase in THC, but kids don't know what they're ingesting. What else is cut into that marijuana? Particularly with, when I hear about the seizures, the hallucinations, was it all marijuana? We're just hearing too much from law enforcement, the fentanyl, the dangers with the drugs, simply because dealers want to make more money. They don't care what they're putting into the drug to make it stretch more. So we've got that. I think the vaping. A lot of adults are expressing concern about the vaping with their kids. And again, I don't know that the kids know exactly what they're getting. They're very trusting of what people are providing them. So.
And I think that some of our kids think we also are pretty naive in terms of what we know. And we see with that vaping and marijuana, it's a more discreet way of using marijuana. And that's something that we see and hear about. So the more our kids know that we know, that we're having these conversations because we're on top of it and we're aware of it. And really when Sandy talked about trauma and maybe some of the reasons why kids use, that's a great conversation starter to have with kids is, so tell me about, what do you think, why do you think, if you have any peers that use, tell me why you think they use, and have that dialogue. And if they say, well, because they're struggling with anxiety, or if they say they're having some hard times in their life, or they've struggled with grief, well, how else can we maybe cope with those things? And really engaging in some heavy dialogue. Again, I'll just reiterate that importance of talking early, talking often. A couple things that I brought with us that you can just be aware of out on our table. And if you have friends that have other ages of kids, but this is a really good, just kind of easy fact sheet on talking early and often, and it's separated into age levels, right? So that there's certain things we're going to talk about when we have younger kids, middle school, and high school, and it just serves as a really good guide. So these are all things that SCIP puts together and has available. Again, 6 parenting practices that help reduce the chances your child will develop a drug or alcohol problem. These are great resources to just tap into. These are all found on our website, and sometimes we'll put them in our SCIP newsletters and whatnot, but they're free and they're accessible, so get around on those websites and see what you might find that can be a tool to help you or help your family.
I think one of the things we need to focus on too is remember that as youth, their frontal lobe is not developed fully. And that's their impulse control center. So they are impulsive. They're spontaneous. They live in the moment, and really that's all they know. They don't think down the road in terms of those consequences. And that is our role as adults that care about them. And so when I look at some of this paraphernalia and the work we do on a system level in working with various stakeholders throughout the communities, some of this clothing, if kids wear it thinking it's funny, and even if they're not using, all of a sudden there's people that start associating with them that probably are high risk. All of a sudden we see some human trafficking going on, or a trend with peers talking to peers. Social media has created incredible opportunities, but it's also created incredible dangers. I mean, kids getting, and I know you've heard this throughout the news, but getting themselves not only in situations with whether it's someone preying on them, but honestly, we're seeing anxiety, depression at first, second grade. That's an environmental issue. That's not a school issue. Some of it is sleep deprivation, being able to be on technology like that for long periods of time. What's going on in the home or maybe nothing's going on. Everybody's so focused in their own world with their social media that important processing, spending time together, touching, caring about one another, having safety be number one, kids feeling like they're part of that sense of family and community. Social media has really broke that down a bit. Parents allowing their kids to keep phones in their room all night. That sleep deprivation is actually one of the highest causes of mental health concerns among youth. And it's funny, I'll work with parents on that and they'll say, I'm doing really good during the week, but on the weekend I let them do it. And I think, but they're still vulnerable. Who are they talking to? And they're not quite sure, but very trusting when it comes to social media.
And I just want to also kind of end with, as parents, parenting is hard. None of us are perfect. I will say nobody is really immune to substance use, right? I mean, no matter, we have the best of intentions and sometimes our kids take a path. And we can't beat ourselves up as parents because we do the best we can, but we want to make sure we have done the best we can, that we have had those discussions and that we have, tried to make ourselves aware. And then if we do have a student that's struggling, that it's okay to say, hey, my kid needs help. I want to connect them to services and not feel embarrassed, ashamed, or bad about that. Because kids, that's just, sometimes there's some things with peers or other things that we think we know it all, and pretty soon we realize that we were kind of in the closet. So again, just really engaging in those dialogues, talking to our kids and educating ourselves on what's going on and what's around and what's available out there.
So one of our biggest priorities for next year, I really feel like the schools are doing as much as they can, along with their primary role of educating our kids. And I really think law enforcement is on board. I really hope our priority this coming year is we get parents really engaged. I think everybody's really busy. I'm not talking about taking a lot of time with people. I think it's more no different than when our kids are little, talking to them about clicking their seatbelt, those kind of things. Let's make it so normal. So we hope we really have a more collective community piece. And we focus on home and the environment around our homes. And kids really getting the message from adults that it's real okay to be you, and we want you safe, we want you happy, we want you healthy, that this leads nowhere. So I'm excited about it. I think we've got a good plan. If you're interested, talk to us and we'll tell you when our meetings are going to be coming into the fall.
And I'm putting this final information up here. This is just some resources that I personally like that has some good information for parents and professionally. But there's a lot of great things to tap into, whether it's local or online or nationally. But each of these websites actually has specific strategies for parents, and you can kind of troubleshoot if you're having troubles engaging in conversation or you're seeing something going on within your home. These have some tips and tools and resources that we can tap into, because I think as parents we all need as much support and guidance with each other and having those conversations together as we can really get. So for those of you that made it here tonight, I really thank you for being here, and hopefully you walk away with something. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.